Hey, everybody, we're back again with Paul Craig Roberts, this time to talk about the recent Supreme Court decision involving affirmative action. And Paul, what is your reading on that? Does it really do anything to correct it?
Well, in principle, but I don't think it'll have much effect because it's about 60 years too late. The courts have tolerated discrimination against white males in university admissions now since the beginning of affirmative action, as they call it. And what affirmative action has always meant is that it's permissible not to give white university applicants the protection of the 14th Amendment. They do not have to be treated equally under the law. They can be discriminated against in favor of admitting Black applicants who are less qualified according to objective measures.
Well, the way I understand it, originally, affirmative action, the way it was worded, it merely said that race can't be used to discriminate against someone, but then it morphed into favoring minorities over whites, didn't it? I mean, originally, it wasn't worded that way, but it soon became a device to promote Blacks and other minorities over whites.
Well, according to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, racial quotas are strictly prohibited. The act strictly prohibits racial quotas in university admissions. In other words, you are correct. But what happened was the compliance officer of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, a man named Alfred Bloom Rosen, he reasoned that the courts give deference to the regulatory agency. This, of course, came out of the 1930s, the Roosevelt New Deal era, when the regulatory agencies were given the rights to write the regulations that implement the laws the Congress passed. So by 1965, there was many years of precedence where regulatory agencies would look at a law and decide how it would be implemented. And he reasoned that the long years that the courts had given deference to the regulatory agency, that he could impose quotas, and he did. So the quotas were imposed despite the statutory prohibition in the law itself by the compliance chief of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So a racial privilege system was created that favored Blacks over whites based on objective standards, the standards used to determine university admissions. And the various efforts over time to deal with that, the court never really supported. So now suddenly, 60 years later, they rule that, well, this is contrary to the 14th Amendment. Well, 60 years is a long time for something to get institutionalized. And it's institutionalized, not just in university admissions, but in employment, in hiring, in promotions. So the kind of racial preferences that the court just overruled have been established for 60 years. And there's such a thing as squatters' rights. And essentially, the Blacks have a right. That's something they've been accustomed to for a long, long time. And this is why you see so many calls for the impeachment of the Supreme Court for ruling in favor of the 14th Amendment.
Well, Paul, actually, the way Roberts worded the ruling, he left the door wide open where they could still use race if it is an indication of how it built character, the type of character against adversity and determination that the university would find useful in its student body. So, Roberts, Justice Roberts, it's a toothless ruling, isn't it? The way he left that door open.
Well, I think perhaps the court doesn't realize what has happened. You see, I explained all this, I don't know, 25 or more years ago in my book, The New Color Line. Yeah. I predicted exactly what was going to happen. This is a complete, solid history of the act, how it was passed, what the exact words are, and then how it was subverted and stood on its head by the EEOC. Okay, now to get to your question, the equal treatment doctrine that you referred to at the beginning of our interview, where the original interpretation was that you could not discriminate against a qualified Black applicant on the basis of his race. That was what the Congress thought they were implementing, that everyone who met the objective admission standards had to be admitted. You could not say, well, we're not going to let this guy in because he's Black or he's white or he's an Asian or whatever. So it was an effort to stop what was claimed to be alleged discrimination against Black university applicants. Well, you see, this equal treatment doctrine, Larry, is based on a merit-based society. In other words, if a Black person or anyone can meet the objective admission requirements for university admissions, the person cannot be denied on the basis of his race. Well, that's no longer what we have. We don't have a merit-based society. And so you can't today go bring a case and say, well, look, the Black guy, he got in with a score much lower than mine because admission is no longer based on objective standards. So this is why Roberts' ruling there doesn't mean anything, because to prove that you're discriminating against whites, there have to be objective standards, and that you're letting Blacks in at a lower objective standard than whites. But when there are no objective standards, you haven't any measure that the whites are being discriminated against. And that's what's happened. So the standards today is like you say, you write an essay and you use the right words. And so then the admission committee can say, oh, see, we're supporting inclusion and diversity. And so it's not discrimination, it's the support of inclusion and diversity, because there are no objective admission standards, except maybe they're applied to whites still.
So, in other words, this ruling isn't going to do anything to reverse affirmative action or to address the inequities against nothing, right?
Well, it's not going to help white students. But you see, the case was brought by Asians.
Right.
And the Asians at Harvard are clearly discriminated against. And they brought the case. So I think Harvard is going to have to, in some way, take in more Asians. Now, at whose expense will they take them in? The blacks who have the privileges or the whites who don't? So Roberts' ruling may actually, at Harvard anyhow, it may end up further discriminating against whites. If Harvard says, well, we're not going to give up, we're not going to reduce the percentage of blacks, but we better increase the percentage of Asians so the whites go down. That could be the outcome. I mean, I don't know exactly what Harvard's going to do, but the real point I want to make about this is that the intellectual class, the law schools, the medical schools, the universities, the media, the Democrat Party, they no longer believe in a merit-based society, because a merit-based society produces unequal outcomes. And unequal outcomes are not equity. Equity today, the way they describe it, is equal outcomes. And so if you don't believe in a merit-based system, you're not going to have any sort of objective admission standards. And so, as there are no objective admission standards, not even in law schools, the law schools are abandoning the LSAT test, because if you use it, then there's evidence that you're discriminating in favor of blacks against Asians and whites. So the universities have abandoned objective standards, so there's no proof of discrimination. And moreover, the universities don't believe in a merit-based society. In fact, they see the 14th Amendment as an obstacle to inclusion and equity and all that stuff that they go on about. And this is why you see the intellectual class saying the Supreme Court justices have to be impeached, because Roberts' ruling blocks equity, inclusion, and raising up the poor, oppressed blacks. And so it's seen, the Roberts ruling is seen as an act of white supremacy, the effort to uphold a merit-based system that favors white people. And this is the way it's seen now. So the real crisis in our society is that there's no intellectual support for a merit-based society.
What are the long-term effects of the destruction of a merit-based society? And are we seeing those effects already?
Well, I think you see them already, because if you look at all the studies and all the measures of Black performance on tests, Asian performance, white performance, the Black performance. Now, some Blacks do just as well as whites and Asians. Not all of them, but many don't and are let in at much lower standards. And so then they have to lower the standards of the teaching, of the education. And so the remnants of a merit-based faculty, who are basically today oppressed in universities, medical schools, law schools, they're seen as some kind of evil person trying to prevent Black advancement. So they don't have any sort of credibility when they say, look, if we keep lowering all the standards, what is the capability of the graduates? Is it the same as it used to be, or is it declining? And if we're taking people who have difficulty understanding the concepts, and we're doing this in order to advance equity and inclusion, what are we doing to the quality of the education and the quality of their professional performance? So it does look like it's going to be a decline in capabilities. But it's even worse than that, Larry, because what the society is doing and has been doing now for decades is teaching blacks to hate whites. I mean, you can see the most vicious expressions of hatred of whites by some blacks. And so if you are empowering people on the basis of racial preferences, and these people are taught to hate whites, how comfortable is a white guy going to be with a black doctor?
Yeah.
A black lawyer? You see what I mean? There's no, if you teach hatred, I'm sorry, Larry, if you teach hatred, then there's no sympathy between the races. And so if you're a multicultural, diverse society and you teach one group to hate the other, you're not going to succeed as a society. And this is the great challenge to America. How in the world do we have a society when one group is told they have been oppressed for their whole lives by whites who are racist by birth, and that these whites are responsible for blacks not being successful as whites, and so on and so on. And then you give those people all kinds of preferences that put them in charge or elevate them. What is the effect of their mentality? And it has to be very negative toward white people. So, I mean, we see this already in the military. The military cannot recruit. Why? Because the white guys have learned. In fact, the military's told them, we're not going to promote you because we have too many white officers. But we're going to put you in classes where you learn that you are a racist. And we're going to put you under the command of blacks who think you're a racist. And so you say, what the hell do I want to get in that situation for? And so none of the services can meet their recruitment. And they're so stupid, they can't put two and two together.
Yeah,
would you want to join a service that tells you in advance they're going to discriminate against you in every possible way?
Military families that have traditionally been the big supplier of people joining the military, they're not sending their kids into the military anymore. Generations before them carried that out, but no longer.
Yeah, that's true. They're discouraging them from. You see, most people don't understand the American military has always been based on a few southern states. There are about 3 southern states that provide the overwhelming majority. Right. And the northern states, nobody. I mean, there'll be a couple of hundred from Massachusetts, and there'll be hundreds of thousands from Alabama. Mm. And so this has stopped, because you've told all these white guys, you can't be promoted. We have too many of you already. But you do have to take sensitivity training and learn you're a racist and a misogynist and that you're homophobic and you're transphobic. And then we're going to put you under those people as your officers who've been trained, who've been taught to hate you because you're a racist and oppress them and so on. Well, nobody says, well, I want to be subject to psychological torture. In my military career, and I want to be and not only that, the white guys can't complain because they don't have any basis on which they can claim they're oppressed because they are, quote, privileged. So what we're talking about, Larry, is the deconstruction of American society. It goes way beyond who gets into the university on what basis. It is the destruction. You see, what's really happened is the cultural Marxists have succeeded in overthrowing American society. The society today is in ruins. And this is, in my view, the consequence of the Supreme Court permitting for about 60 years massive violations of the 14th Amendment. Yeah. In effect, it's dead because it's been dead for 60 years. How do you revive a 60-year-old corpse? And as we've said, and your questions brought out, you can't. And Robert's ruling won't do that. It won't revive it.
You know, Paul, this has been building, as you say, for 60 years, but it's increased, I think, under the Biden administration because the president has said repeatedly that the biggest threat to the United States is white supremacy, feeding into this division by race.
Right. That's exactly. Well, you see, it shows the success of the cultural Marxists, because the dominant ideology today among America's intellectual class doesn't support the founding document of our country any more than does the New York Times 1619 Project.
Yeah.
So, and this, since the Supreme Court now is trying to revive the founding document, there being people saying we impeach them. So if the dominant intellectual ideology does not support the founding document of the country, that is the U.S. Constitution, because it's a white supremacist document, they say, then you've had a revolution. Your country is gone. There's something else here. And this is what people don't realize, and they're not ready for. And I think we're going to see more and more violent manifestations of this. And it's essentially the United States has been destroyed.
You destroy the cohesion of our society, you lower the standards. You know, what happens with the nations that want to surpass us, namely China? You know, what's our position then?
Well, that's the question. I mean, we can't even field an army because of recruitment. We can't even recruit. Of course, they blame the recruitment on everything else. Oh, the job market's too good. People won't go in job, or the Americans are so such poor condition that only 25% of the youth even qualify. So they make they have every kind of excuse to avoid the real fact, and that a white guy that joins the military is going to be submitted to psychological torture for the whole time he's there. and suffer all kinds of discrimination. And so why is he going to go? And why does it matter? Because the whites are still 60% of the population. So if you can't draw on 60% of the population for the military, who's going to be in it? It's hard to imagine a military composed of just transgendered people and homosexuals and feminists. I mean, what kind of military is it going to be? I mean, it's not something that's going to put the fear of God in the Russian troops or the Chinese troops or the Iranians. They're going to say, wow, this isn't even an army, you know? So I just don't see, I think the country is finished. It's finished. How do you put Humphrey Dumphrey back together? How do you put him back together? He's been pushed off the wall and is smashed in 1,000 pieces, and nobody even supports putting him back together. I mean, the ordinary people do. It's clear the ordinary people supported the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action, but they don't have any power. they have no power, and we know voting doesn't matter or count, and they certainly don't influence intellectual opinion or university teachings or public school teachings or the media. And so we have a situation where the people who actually believe in the founding document are powerless and can do nothing.
Paul,
And,
let me bring in a side argument here. What about those who might say that, well, why pick on blacks getting favorable treatment when Harvard and other elite institutions for generations have been allowing legacy admissions, unqualified, dumb white guys whose families are rich, influential, or whose fathers went to Harvard or elsewhere, and they're let in, whether they're qualified or not. What about that argument?
well, it's not a race-based argument. And it's based on the fact that, in fact, that happened a long time ago. I mean, that's been gone for the longest time. It was that way because they were the supporters of the college.
Yeah.
Fathers who were the graduates. This was the original source of the endowments and the backing for the college. And the reason people wanted to go to Harvard was not because you learned anything any better than anywhere else, but you joined a network. You had a system of you had a network in which you could get job placements, advancements, promotions. It was kind of like being a member of an aristocracy in the old days. It was a connection that was valuable, not a valuable education. It was a valuable connection. And so it worked as long as the connection was among the most successful people, the most successful professionals, the most successful people in banking and finance and Wall Street. That worked. And so that's why it happened. It wasn't, they didn't say, oh, we're going to discriminate against able whites in favor of dumb whites. It wasn't that. It was that, hey, this guy gave us $100,000 last year and the year before and the year before, and he wants his son to go here. He's paying for the university. We better put his son in.
But Paul, since a lot of these dumb whites got in through legacy admission, they became they attained status in society, powerful positions, influential positions. So didn't they degrade the quality of merit and competency in society even before affirmative action?
There's not signs of it. In fact, it's not clear how dumb they were. It may be they were not, in the top 10% of their class, but they could have been in the top 20%. But that generally doesn't get you into Harvard. It's not that they were dumb. They were probably smarter than people admitted to ordinary state universities. If these legacy admissions had, applied to the University of Georgia, they'd probably been in the top percentiles. It's just they weren't at Harvard and Princeton and Yale. And so it's not like they were dumb. They didn't flunk out. They just didn't really show exceptional performance. They didn't graduate magna cum laude or anything like that. But they graduated and they performed the jobs. So I don't think that's, you see, that argument is an effort to cover up the fact that we violated equal treatment under the law officially, not just Harvard letting in somebody's son, but as a national policy, we imposed it on everybody, and it discriminated against whites and Asians. And at Harvard, the discrimination's mainly against the Asians. there's some studies that show that the percentage of whites that get in are about correct with what should be, given the scores and the percentages of the population and all of that. But the blacks percentage is way up above what it should be, and the Asians is way down below what it should be based on objective measures. So that's why the case was brought by Asians. It was this ruling of the Supreme Court that Roberts wrote the general account of. It is a product of Asians suing Harvard, bringing a case against Harvard. It wasn't brought by white people. And it was a specific case of Harvard discriminating against Asians. And a number of people have made this clear for some time that this was going on. Ron Unz has a website, the Unz Review, and he has repeatedly proven massive discrimination against Asians at Harvard. And I guess the Asians said, hey, look, there's all this evidence, let's make our case. And they succeeded. But this was not a case based on black and white. The whites really weren't part of it. They didn't bring the case. And I don't think it will have any effect on white admissions. But at least at Harvard, it will improve the admissions of Asians. They'll be more merit-based. And as I said earlier, I think the people Harvard will cut out won't be the unqualified blacks. It'll be the qualified whites to make room for more Asians. Because who's going to speak for the whites? There's no organization. If you have a white organization, it's proof you're a white supremacist and a threat to democracy, and you're going to overthrow the country, and you'll be infiltrated by the FBI, and they'll arrest the leaders on whatever charges they can come up with. If you try to stand up for whites, you prove the propaganda that you're a racist, because it's racist to defend whites. You can't get around it. You can't say, well, no, I'm not. I'm defending equal opportunity. But that's not what people want. They don't want equal opportunity because it's merit-based and it produces unequal outcomes. And so the whole commitment of the American intellectual class, the universities and everything, is for equal outcomes, not equal opportunity. So everything is turned against merit-based indicators. Well, if you don't have merit-based indicators, you can't prove discrimination.
Well, how rapidly do you see this accelerating now, this division of society and the ensuing destruction? It's no longer a cohesive society. Identity groups are warring against each other. It's being encouraged by the current administration. I mean, how rapid is this slide now?
Oh, I think it's extremely rapid. It doesn't take any effort to notice that in a country that's still 60 to 70% white people have disappeared. They've disappeared from corporate ads. Yeah. They're disappearing from television, talking heads. They're disappearing from Hollywood movies. They're just simply it's almost like there aren't any whites in America. You don't see them anymore. They're not in advertisements. They're and all of the roles, that whites have always been in, like Snow White. Now we've got Snow Black. You keep seeing all these reports that the next James Bond is going to be a black woman. you know, you just see the role of white people in entertainment. You know, it's just sort of disappearing. The stars are increasingly somebody else. Well, that's all right. There should be everybody represented, but what we're seeing is not that. We're seeing people excluded.
Yeah, they're even inserting black actors and actresses in historic dramas where, like England in the 16th century, where the royal family didn't include blacks. Now suddenly you have to include a black as a royal family member. I mean, it's a point of absurdity. It's not even historically accurate anymore. And I understand the Indiana Jones movie, the latest one, he's beat up by a woman in the movies.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's another aspect of it. The women have taken all the male roles. What I wrote something today about that. I was reading a car magazine, and lo and behold, the head of General Motors racing team is a woman. Well, wherever you look, you see men's roles falling to women. And so what's the man's role now? He practically doesn't have one. Used to, you could tell, women had their roles, men had their roles. No, it wasn't a question of somebody being more or less equal. They just had different roles. Well, now the women have all the roles, the men don't have any. What's the role for the man? It's not, but the attack on women is going on too. See, at the same time that the women are taking men's roles, it's now with this transgender stuff.
Right.
The men are taking women's roles. So if a man can be a woman, as the transgender people claim, it destroys the concept of woman. So, and you see who's suffering from this transgender stuff most? It's the feminists. The feminists are the ones who oppose it because they realize if a man can be a woman, what is the concept of a woman? Is it no longer exists, So and lo and behold, the feminists now are denounced up and down by the transgender people.
Yeah, I keep when I talk with people about this, I say, if even 5 years ago, you were to tell somebody that there would be men in women's sports and it'd be okay, and nobody would be objecting to it, at least institutionally. I mean, people wouldn't believe that such a change could occur, that could be accepted. One thing after another, all the norms are being struck down and replaced by absurdities. And it's like the frog in boiling water. The temperature is raised little by little, and then by the time you're boiling, it's too late to do anything about it. It's as we said, all these elements now are accelerating, and I think the whites and others are just accepting it because they think, throw up their hands, there's nothing that could be done. We're past the point of no return.
Some of them are like that. Others simply are unaware.
That's
or they're older like you and I, and they think this is absurd and can't go on because it's absurd. And what they don't realize is there's been an ideological revolution, and no one believes any longer in a merit-based society. They don't believe in the Constitution. I'm talking about, when I say no one, I mean the intellectual class. Yeah. And they're not very intellectual. That's another thing that's happening. Even the concept of an intellectual is being destroyed because you're not allowed reason, only emotion. Emotion replaces reason, and ideological wishes replace facts. So you get official narratives, like you said earlier, they have no historic truth. And so increasingly people live in a fictional world, and the youth are born into it and don't know any different.
Yeah.
So this is why the revolution can succeed. You and I, and we can see what's happened. We know what the difference is. But the young people, they're born into this. It's normal.
Yeah.
They're indoctrinated and enculturated in public schools to accept aversive racism. They're taught critical race theory. They're taught that they could be any gender they want, and all of this becomes normal. To us, it's ridiculous, but to them, it's normal. Let me say one other thing here. If you notice, I mean, there are men who claim to be women. Either they want to get into the women's private quarters, or they want to compete in sports against them because they can't win against men. But for the most part, it seems that the transgendered people are mainly girls. They're mainly females among the youth. They're the ones who seem to be having the biggest issue, or the most affected by this transgender stuff. Now, I think it's a direct product of feminism, because what did the feminists really teach women? That you don't want to be a woman. You want the man's roles. You want to be a man. You want to have all the roles men have and none of the roles women have. I mean, motherhood, that's out. Being a wife, that's out. You're supposed to be as sexually promiscuous as men. You're supposed to be domineering and running the corporations and running the law schools, and you're supposed to, and so all the decades of this feminist propaganda has undermined the concept of woman. And so the girls don't really want to be women, because we're supposed to be men. They got to be in the military. They got to be generals. They got to, it's just endless. And they have to be Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts have to have girls. Now, the Girl Scouts don't have to have boys. But there's no space for boys anymore. The girls have to be there. If it's a little league baseball team, there's got to be girls. There's got to be girls in the Boy Scouts. It's wherever you look. So I think the feminists are the ones who are ultimately responsible for the young women, the girls, really, not even at puberty yet, who think they need to be men. And I think that came out of undermining by discrediting the traditional roles of women.
I noticed, Bo, even with some of these TV shows, the new cop shows, the women are in charge, the men are meek, the women are dominant, they don't panic, the men do in a stress situation. They've assumed the traditional role of men even in these cop shows now. They're the tough cops, and their associates, their sidekicks, are meek men that take orders from them and can't handle a situation as well as their woman boss.
Right. That's right. So that's what we're talking about. This is what's happened. And so again, my conclusion is the cultural Marxists succeeded in their revolution, and the country has been overthrown. And there is still a country here, but it's not the same one. And no one has come to terms with this. So where are the intellectuals pointing this out? They don't exist. So we've had a silent, total revolution.
Is it too late to turn it around, Paul?
Oh, yeah. You could never turn it around. Oh, look, we've even lost the concept of woman. We don't even know what a woman is now. You remember the Project Veritas guy?
Yeah.
That they fired because he was so effective.
Yeah.
He went around asking these transgender experts in the universities, what is a woman? They couldn't answer. A woman is whoever says she's a woman. And he said, yes, that's right. But what is a woman? Nobody could answer. They would get mad and throw him out. Well, if you can't say what a woman is, what is means there's no concept of woman. And I think gradually this is dawning on the feminists, because they were based in womenhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they didn't realize they were destroying that by getting rid of women's roles and making them adopt men's roles. Well, hell, if you don't even know what a woman is, I mean, how do you turn things around? I mean, and a man, like you said, the man now is subservient because he's lost his roles and he's been demonized. And if he sticks up for himself, it's proof that he is a racist or a misogynist. And so they can't even defend themselves.
Well, Paul, the last Supreme Court justice placed on the Supreme Court was asked during confirmation hearings what a woman is, and she couldn't answer it.
Well, nobody can anymore. You see, and why was she placed on there? Does anybody really think that she's competent to be a Supreme Court justice? Of course not. Of course not. I mean, she's probably competent to do some things, but she wasn't put there because of any legal competence or experience or anything. So they don't even care. I mean, law, the rule of law gets abandoned when it doesn't serve the dominant interest. And I think that's what we're living in, a complete, total social, legal, and economic breakdown.
Where does this lead to? I mean, you say it's irreversible. So are whites just going to fade meekly away, or is there going to be a real upheaval? I hate to talk about what could happen, but I mean, we get this kind of a breakdown in society when you get chaos spreading. Law and order now is finished in the big cities. All this is increasing, intensifying. So are we going to see a scenario that's played out in other countries that have disintegrated, or will we meekly accept this new world?
Well, it's going to fall apart, regardless of whether it's accepted or not. We've already fallen apart. We are, identity politics is the ideology, and it's totally, you can't have identity politics and multiculturalism, because identity politics turns everybody else against white people. So we've fallen apart, and there's no putting it back. We see a lot of people fleeing the bluest cities and states, like California is losing 300,000 or 400,000 people a year.
Yeah,
they're whites. They're white people. They're leaving. They're going to Texas and Florida. And God, we hope they don't bring their same voting pattern with them, or we'll be fleeing Texas and Florida. And they're fleeing all the Democratic cities, and they're going into red states or trying to. But at the same time, the Biden regime lets people walk in and they ship them to the red states. So you're seeing the people who are trying to get among their own kind being frustrated by the federal government, because as many Californians that flee to Texas, Biden has the Hispanics and whoever else fleeing in from Mexico to Texas. So it looks to me like this, everything is disintegrating. It will continue to disintegrate. And you see white birth rates falling. You see marriages stopping. All of the mores, all of the social mores are gone. And, older people don't even know how to act around young people. They don't know what they can say, what words they can use. They feel increasingly uncomfortable, because who knows who's going to set them off. And the young people no longer have any manners. They're not going to respect somebody because they're elderly or older, or but they say the wrong thing. Oh, you're a racist, or you're this, or you're that. And there's just what is the basis of cohesion? It seems to be hatred of white people. Try to find, if you want to understand a country, look for what holds people together. What is the cohesion? What is the cohesive force?
Mm.
Well, the United States is hatred of white people. They're demonized constantly. A white person couldn't say anything about a black person. It's a hate crime. It's hate speech. You lose your job. You may get arrested. The black can say what he wants about a white. Anything he can say, you should be killed. You're the greatest threat to America. They can say anything more about a white person, and there's no consequences. You can't say anything about a black. In fact, you can't even use ordinary words if the black might interpret them in some new way that you never heard of. And so what is then the cohesive basis? It's hatred of white people. And who epitomizes the most? Trump supporters. And this is why it's not illegitimate to steal an election, because the Trump supporters aren't legitimate. And they got no right to elect somebody. And so what if the election was stolen? It should have been stolen. That's the attitude of the Democrats and of everybody who hates white people because they're racist, misogynist, white supremacists, and all the rest. I mean, just look at all the monuments that are gone. It's not just Confederate war heroes. It's all kinds of monuments. White people in general, and not just here in England. And you see, even in the great universities like Cambridge and Oxford, for example, in Cambridge, there was a stained glass window at one of the colleges in honor of the man who created modern statistics. He was warden of the college, or founder, or a member of the college, and created statistics. Well, it turned out he was also interested in eugenics. Well, at the time, it was a completely valid thing. All kinds of people were interested in it, but now it's considered to be racist, so they took the window down.
Yeah.
Well, it's mindless. You go back and destroy people based on views now, 100, 200 years later, that really have no validity now, much less then. And this is commonplace. We are erasing history. Well, if you erase history, who are you? Without a history, what are you? You're nothing. You're some made up thing. There can't be any cohesion. History is what holds you together. So when you erase it, you erase your own cohesion. And this is going on in front of all of the so-called intellectuals. They don't notice it or say anything about it. They don't say, hey, how come we destroyed America?
So much of this was envisioned and predicted, anticipated in George Orwell's 1984, where they were literally erasing history down the hole, and then they'd write a new version of history, and then nobody would know the difference, the memory hole in 1984. But getting back to you mentioned the presidential election. What do you expect to happen in this coming election, and do you expect it to bring any kind of changes, positive or negative?
I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. I don't think the establishment will permit Trump to be president.
Yeah.
So whether they can convict him and put him in jail and stop him from campaigning, whether I don't know. I don't know what they'll do, or whether they'll just steal the election, even though the polls show he's miles ahead of Biden. it's hard to steal an election when the polls show there's no support for the candidate who steals the election. So, plus all the Trump supporters have gone through 2 stolen elections already, and I just don't know. I don't know whether they'll just give up, like you said, or whether they'll get angry and blow up. You have to ask yourself, what does America offer traditional whites today besides demonization, discrimination, attacks on their children? They're determined to take the children away from them by teaching them that they're racist and that the kids can be whatever gender they want. And I mean, the parental authority is out. I mean, what does a white person get out of being an American? I mean, what? As far as I can see, nothing but trouble. What kind of authority, what kind of ability does a white person have to speak his mind? It's the most dangerous thing to do. Fired. You can't even speak your mind privately on social media. Fired. So what does America offer white people? Nothing. Discrimination, demonization. That's all. There's nothing else that offers them. And you even had recently an Asian male produce a video saying, what are we doing to white people? Complaining about it, documenting, showing what we're doing to them. He says that the white people don't understand. They are demonized more than Jews were in Nazi Germany. So does this demonization, is this the forerunner to actual extermination?
Yeah, well, some of the extremists are saying that whites are racist. It's in their DNA. And these ridiculous statements are not challenged and increasingly accepted by people in power.
Yeah. That's right. So again, what's it like? Who is really discriminated against in America? Blacks or whites?
Yeah. Right.
The whites are said to be privileged,
yeah.
but they're the ones who suffer all the discrimination and all the demonization. There's no hate speech protection for whites. They have none.
Yeah.
And as we've said, the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action is not going to help the whites at all. It'll help the Asians, I think, and it'll be at the whites' expense.
Yeah.
So there you have it, Larry. I don't think we need to go on about it anymore. I think this is a very serious situation. I don't know of anyone who's addressing it. The French novelist Jean Raspail addressed the question back in 1973 in his book, The Camp of the Saints. And it was later, two or 3 years later, it was published in English. And today, you couldn't possibly publish it. But he shows in a novel what happens when a country destroys the basis of its belief. When a country loses belief in itself and in its principles, its values, its social mores, it ceases to exist, and anybody can take it over. So in this novel, the entirety of France and all of Europe are taken over by 1 million Indians who happen to land on the Riviera and walk in. And there's so little self-belief on the part of the French that they just succumb. Yeah. They simply become, and the first law the Indians pass is there's no intermarriage between white people. And so they cease to exist, the French, and not just them, but the entirety of Europe. So this is a novel, but it's prescient, and you can see it happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And look at France. I mean, who defends French people?
Yeah.
Marine Le Pen, and they're always trying to put her in prison. And even the French people won't elect her.
Yeah.
And she's the only one defending them. So, you can see how far it's gone. There's no self-belief among the whites. They have been deracinated. The whites are deracinated. And their last attempted leader is Trump, and he doesn't even realize it. He thinks he's speaking for the people against the establishment or something like that, But they see him as the last person who's willing to try to represent them. And he's not going to be allowed to do it.
I agree with that. There's no way they're going to let him be president. So, Paul Frank Roberts, thank you again for some very disturbing but accurate analysis of where we're headed as a nation, where we're headed as a people, and where we're headed as a civilization. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, the trash can of history.